My name is Alara. I'm 30 years old. 6 months ago, I was lying in a sterile hospital bed at Memorial Presbyterian, my fingernails digging into the plastic side rails as a contraction tore through my lower spine. I was dilated to 8 centimeters. The pain was blinding, the kind of absolute, consuming agony that narrows your entire universe down to a single monitor beeping in the corner. I reached for my phone with a trembling hand and dialed my husband's number for the 9th time. It rang twice. Then, the sharp, hollow tone of the call being declined. I told myself he was in the elevator. I told myself he was running from the parking garage, panicked, sprinting past the security desk to get to me. We had planned this moment for 3 years. The matching overnight bag sitting in the corner, the perfectly curated birth playlist, the promise he'd made holding my hands across our kitchen island. I will never let you do this alone. A nurse, a younger woman named Brioni, came in to check my monitors. As she moved around the bed, her hip caught the cord for the privacy blinds separating my room from the hallway corridor. The blinds shrieked open. I turned my head, sweating, exhausted, and looked through the glass. Across the hall, through the wide window of room 412, I saw him. Vance, my husband. He wasn't running. He wasn't panicked. He was sitting in a velvet visitor's chair, the soft pink glow of a bassinet lamp illuminating his face. And in his arms, wrapped in a hospital blanket, was a newborn baby. He was crying. Not tears of fear, but the deep, chest-heaving tears of absolute joy. Sitting in the bed next to him, reaching out to stroke his hair, was Kaelia, my best friend of 12 years. I was 40 feet away giving birth to his child while he was holding hers. Before we go any further, I need to ask you something. If you've ever had that gut feeling, that quiet, nagging instinct whispering that the people closest to you are hiding something, but you pushed it down because the truth seemed too monstrous to believe, please take a moment to like this video and hit subscribe. Drop your location and local time in the comments. I want to know where you are right now, because betrayal is a universal language, and I want to know I'm not speaking it alone. Now, let me take you back, because a betrayal of this magnitude doesn't happen overnight. It is built, brick by brick, lie by lie, right in front of your face. I met Kaelia in my freshman year at a liberal arts college in upstate New York. She was a theater major, loud, magnetic, the kind of girl who walked into a room and instantly recalibrated the gravity. I was a quiet architecture student, content to sit in the corners and sketch. We made sense as a pair, or at least that's what I told myself. She needed an audience, I needed a shield. For a decade, Kaelia was the sister I never had. We shared apartments, we shared clothes, we shared secrets. But looking back, there was a pattern. A toxic, subtle rhythm I was too blind to see. Kaelia didn't just want to be loved. She wanted to be the most loved. Whenever I got a promotion, she would suffer a devastating breakup. Whenever I planned a vacation, she would have a medical scare that required me to stay behind. She operated on a currency of crisis, and I was her most reliable bank. Then, I met Vance. Vance was 32, a regional director for a commercial logistics firm. He was steady. He wore tailored suits, drove a spotless Audi, and remembered the names of my coworkers. He wasn't swept up in Kaelia's chaotic orbit. In fact, when I first introduced them at a dinner party in downtown Chicago, he seemed immune to her. "She's exhausting, Alara," he told me that night, unbuttoning his collar as we washed dishes in my tiny galley kitchen. "I don't know how you do it. Everything is a performance with her." I laughed, feeling a strange, deep relief. Finally, someone who saw it. Someone who chose me over the spectacle. "She means, well," I defended her weakly. "She just has a lot of big emotions." "Well," Vance said, kissing my forehead, "I prefer your quiet ones." We dated for 2 years. We got engaged in Kyoto, under the cherry blossoms. Kaelia was my maid of honor. During her speech at the reception, she cried so hard she had to stop speaking twice. "Alara has been my rock," she sobbed to the crowd of 200 guests. "And Vance? Vance, you are taking my other half. You better promise to take care of us both." People laughed. They thought it was a charming, slightly eccentric joke from a devoted best friend. I laughed too. But I remember Vance's face in that moment. He didn't laugh. He just stared at her, his expression completely unreadable, a muscle feathering in his jaw. I thought he was just annoyed. I didn't know he was calculating. The shift happened so slowly it was almost imperceptible, like the temperature dropping in a room 1 degree at a time. It started 6 months into our marriage. Kaelia lost her job at a boutique marketing agency. She couldn't make rent on her loft. Alara, please? She begged over the phone, her voice thick with panic. I just need a place to crash for a few weeks. Just until I get on my feet. I asked Vance. I expected him to say no. I expected him to remind me that she was exhausting, that this was our new home, our sanctuary. Instead, he looked up from his laptop, tapped his pen against his desk, and shrugged. She's your best friend. We have the guest room. It's the right thing to do. Kaelia moved in. 3 weeks turned into 3 months. Suddenly, my quiet, predictable marriage was a party of 3. I would come home from the architecture firm exhausted, only to find Vance and Kaelia drinking wine on the patio, laughing about some inside joke they'd formed while I was at the office. If I sat down with them, the conversation would subtly shift, stalling out, as if I had interrupted something. You guys are home early, I said one Tuesday, dropping my keys on the counter. Kaelia smiled, swirling her Pinot Grigio. Vance got off early and helped me prep for my interview tomorrow. He's been such a lifesaver, Alara. Honestly, I don't know what I'd do without him. Vance didn't look at me. He just took a sip of his wine. Just helping out, he said casually. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself I was a terrible friend for feeling a hot, dark spike of jealousy in my own home. I was the wife. I had the ring. I had the life. Why was I threatened by a woman sleeping in my guest room on a mattress she didn't own? By the time Kaelia finally moved out into an apartment Vance had helped her find, a new dynamic had been cemented. Vance was no longer annoyed by Kaelia. He was her protector. He was the one she called when her car broke down. He was the one who went over to assemble her IKEA furniture because, Alara, you know I'm terrible with tools, and Vance is so good at it. I brought it up once. A Sunday morning, coffee in hand. Vance, I feel like Kaelia relies on you a little too much. It's crossing a boundary. He looked at me like I had just slapped him. Are you serious? Alara, she's practically your sister. She has no family here. Her dad is out of the picture. I'm just trying to be a supportive husband to you by being a supportive friend to her. Would you rather I hate her? He spun it so flawlessly. He made my discomfort sound like cruelty. I apologized. I actually apologized to him for questioning it. 2 years later, the ultimate milestone arrived. After months of tracking temperatures, negative tests, and silent tears in the bathroom, I stared down at a plastic stick on our bathroom counter. 2 pink lines. I walked into the living room, my hands shaking so hard I could barely hold the test. Vance was watching a basketball game. I stepped in front of the TV. He frowned, opening his mouth to ask me to move, and then he saw my face. I held up the test. He dropped the remote. He stood up, walked over to me, and wrapped his arms around my waist, burying his face in my neck. We're going to be parents, he whispered. I love you. I love you so much. It was perfect. For exactly 14 days, it was the happiest period of my life. We started looking at cribs. We picked out paint colors. I told my parents. The world felt golden, safe, and entirely mine. Then came the brunch. We met Kaelia at a trendy bistro downtown. I had a little gift box, prepared a tiny pair of baby socks, and a card that read, "You're going to be an auntie." I couldn't wait to see her face. I couldn't wait for her to celebrate me. We sat down. Before I could even reach into my purse, Kaelia burst into tears. Real, heavy, hyperventilating tears right there in the middle of the crowded restaurant. "Kay, what's wrong?" I asked, my heart dropping. I reached across the table, grabbing her hand. Vance sat rigidly in his chair. He didn't reach for her, but his eyes were locked on her face with an intensity that made the breath catch in my throat. "I didn't want to tell you like this," Kaelia sobbed, pressing a napkin to her eyes. "I'm so stupid. I'm so stupid." "Tell me what?" She looked up, her mascara running. "I'm pregnant, Alara." And he blocked my number. The restaurant noise faded into a dull, rushing static in my ears. "Pregnant?" I echoed. "By who?" Kaelia had been dating a string of men, none of them lasting more than 3 weeks. She waved her hand dismissively. "This guy, Declan. We met at a gallery opening. It was casual, and then this happened. When I told him, he completely ghosted me. His number is disconnected. His LinkedIn is gone. I'm completely alone." She looked at me, her eyes wide and terrified. "I have no one, Alara. I have no one." I slowly pulled my hand back from my purse. The little gift box with the baby socks felt like a brick sitting at the bottom of my bag. I couldn't tell her. Not now. How could I announce my perfect, planned, joyful pregnancy to a woman who had just been abandoned and was terrified? "It's okay," I said softly, my own heart breaking for her, and breaking for myself because my moment was gone. "We're here. We'll help you." I looked at Vance, expecting him to echo my support. Instead, his face was pale, his jaw clenched so tightly I thought his teeth might crack. He stared at Kaelia, and for a fraction of a second, I thought I saw a flash of pure, unadulterated panic in his eyes. "We'll figure it out," Vance said. His voice was hoarse. He cleared his throat. "We'll make sure you're taken care of." I didn't tell Kaelia I was pregnant until a month later. By the time I did, it felt like an afterthought. "Oh my gosh," Kaelia squealed, hugging me carefully so our barely there bumps wouldn't touch. "We're going to be pregnant together. Our babies are going to be best friends. This is perfect." But it wasn't perfect. It was a nightmare disguised as a coincidence. As the trimesters progressed, our pregnancies began to run on parallel tracks, but Kaelia's always required more track. If I had morning sickness, Kaelia was hospitalized for dehydration. If I felt a kick, Kaelia thought she wasn't feeling enough kicks and needed a 2 a.m. ride to the emergency room. And Vance. Vance became her personal concierge. "Alara, I have to go," he said one evening, grabbing his keys from the bowl. I was 7 months pregnant, my ankles swollen, trying to assemble a mobile for the nursery. Kaelia's car won't start in the Target parking lot, and it's freezing out. "Call her an Uber," I said, not looking up from the instructions. "I need your help with this. You promised we'd finish the nursery tonight." "She has all those heavy bags, Alara. An Uber driver isn't going to help a pregnant woman carry groceries up 3 flights of stairs. I'll be back in an hour." He was gone for 4. When I called him, it went to voicemail. When I checked our shared location app, something we'd set up for safety, he had turned his location off. When he finally walked in at midnight, I was sitting in the dark in the glider chair in the half-finished nursery. He flipped on the light and jumped when he saw me. "Where were you?" I asked, my voice deadly calm. "I told you. Helping Kaelia. She was having a meltdown about the baby. She's terrified of doing this alone, Alara. She doesn't have a husband to build a nursery for her." He looked at the mobile components scattered on the rug. "I'm sorry I didn't make it back for this. We'll do it tomorrow. You turned your location off." He didn't miss a beat. My battery was dying. I needed it to stay alive in case of an emergency. He lied with the flawless execution of a man who had practiced in the mirror. I knew he was lying. Women always know. It's an ancient, primal alarm system that rings in your bone marrow. But what do you do with that knowledge when you're 7 months pregnant? Your hormones are raging. And the alternative is blowing up your entire life on a suspicion. You do what millions of women do every day. You swallow the alarm. You build the nursery. You pretend. And so, we hurtled toward the due dates. Kaelia was due on October 12th. I was due on October 18th. On October 10th, everything shattered. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was at my architecture firm, reviewing blueprints for a commercial remodel, when the pain hit. It wasn't the dull ache of Braxton Hicks. It was a sharp, wrapping vice that started in my lower back and clamped over my stomach, knocking the wind out of me. My water broke right there in the drafting room, soaking through my maternity slacks and pooling on the hardwood floor. My coworker, a brilliant, no-nonsense senior architect named Linnea, caught me as my knees buckled. "I've got you," Linnea said, immediately barking at an intern to call an ambulance. "Alara, breathe. We're getting you to Memorial Presbyterian. Call Vance." I sat in the desk chair, my hands shaking so violently I dropped my phone twice. Linnea picked it up, unlocked it with my passcode, and dialed his number. "Ring, ring, voicemail." "He didn't answer," Linnea said, her brow furrowing. "Let me try again." 3 more calls, 3 more voicemails. I sent a text, my fingers fumbling over the glass screen. "Water broke. Going to Memorial. Please hurry. I'm so scared." The ambulance arrived. Linnea held my hand in the back of the rig while the siren wailed. Every bump in the road was agony. The contractions were coming 4 minutes apart. I was terrified. This was my first baby. I was early. Where was my husband? We arrived at the hospital. They rushed me up to the maternity ward, room 411. I was hooked up to the monitors, the sterile smell of iodine and clean linens overwhelming my senses. "Still no answer?" I asked Linnea between gasps. She shook her head, her face tight. I'm going to keep trying. Don't focus on him. Focus on the baby. Focus on breathing. 2 hours passed. The pain escalated into a blinding, white-hot roar. I demanded my phone. I dialed Vance. Call declined. Not missed. Declined. He had looked at the screen, saw my name, and hit the red button. I stared at the phone, my vision blurring with tears. He declined it, I whispered. Linnea's eyes hardened into something terrifyingly cold. She took the phone from my hand. I'm going to find him, she said quietly. You just push when they tell you to. It was right after that when Nurse Brioni came in to check my vitals. It was right after that when her hip caught the blind cord. It was right after that when the universe ripped the blindfold off my eyes and forced me to look. Across the hall, room 412. Vance. Kyalia. A newborn baby. I stared through the glass, the contraction peaking, tearing a ragged, breathless scream from my throat. It wasn't just my body breaking open, it was my reality. The architecture of my entire life was collapsing in real time. The beams snapping, the foundation turning to dust. Through the corridor window, exactly 40 feet away in room 412, the man who had promised to hold my hand while I brought our first child into the world was weeping over another woman's newborn. He was leaning over Kylia's hospital bed. I watched him brush a damp strand of hair from her forehead. I watched him kiss her temple. I watched her reach up, her fingers tangling in the collar of his shirt, the blue Oxford shirt I had ironed for him that very morning. Alara? Linnea's voice broke through the rushing static in my ears. She had turned away from the fetal monitor and followed my gaze. I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. I just pointed a trembling, sweat-slicked finger toward the glass. Linnea stepped toward the window. I watched her back stiffen. I watched her shoulders lock into a rigid line of absolute, horrifying comprehension. She didn't gasp. She didn't ask questions. Linnea was a woman who solved problems for a living, who looked at flawed blueprints and immediately identified where the structure would fail. She saw the failure. She saw my husband. Nurse Brioni rushed into the room, a syringe of medication in her hand. Okay, honey, the doctor is on his way. We are at 9 centimeters. You are doing so great. Close the blinds, Linnea ordered, her voice slicing through the clinical cheerfulness like a scalpel. Close the damn blinds right now. Brioni blinked, startled, and pulled the cord. The heavy gray vinyl snapped shut, severing my view of room 412. But closing the blinds didn't erase the image. It was burned into my retinas. It was etched into the very marrow of my bones. The physical pain of labor is often described as a wave, something that builds, crests, and recedes. But the pain of betrayal is a spike. It impales you and stays there, radiating a cold, dark poison through your veins. Alara, look at me, Linnea said, gripping both sides of my face. Her hands were cool, anchoring me as my entire world spun off its axis. You are going to have this baby, right here, right now. You are not going to think about that room. You are going to think about this room. Do you hear me? I nodded frantically, sobbing, gasping for air. He declined it. I choked out, the words tasting like copper in my mouth. He declined my call. He was looking at his phone, Linnea. He saw it was me. I know, she whispered fiercely. And he is a dead man walking. But right now, you are a mother. You push for your child. Not for him. For your child. Have you ever had to perform the most agonizing, monumental task of your life while your soul was being actively shredded? If you understand what it takes to compartmentalize that kind of trauma to pack it into a tight, dark box in your mind just so you can survive the next 5 minutes, you know the exact kind of primal strength I had to summon. The doctor rushed in. The lights shifted. The room became a blur of blue scrubs, sharp commands, and the relentless, rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor. Push, Alara. Push. I closed my eyes, and instead of the darkness of my own eyelids, I saw Kylia's triumphant, exhausted smile. I saw Vance's tears of joy. The betrayal became a physical weight pressing down on my chest. I channeled every ounce of my shattering heart, every fragment of my rage, every suffocating ounce of my humiliation, and I pushed. I didn't scream in agony. I screamed in fury. I screamed for the 3 years of gaslighting. I screamed for the car breakdowns and the IKEA furniture and the late nights. I screamed for the woman who had moved into my guest room and meticulously stolen my husband. One more, Alara, you've got this. I bore down, my fingers crushing Linnea's hand, and then the pressure vanished. The room filled with the sharp, beautiful, piercing cry of a newborn. It's a boy, the doctor announced, smiling behind his surgical mask. A beautiful, healthy baby boy. They placed him on my chest. He was warm, slippery, and perfect. He had a mop of dark hair and furious tiny fists. The moment his skin touched mine, the rage receded, leaving only a fierce, terrifying, consuming love. I wrapped my arms around him, burying my face in his damp head, inhaling the scent of him. Evander, I whispered, the name we had chosen months ago. My sweet Evander. But even in that sacred, transcendent moment, the poison seeped back in. We had chosen the name, Vance and I. Vance, who was currently 40 feet away, likely naming another child. Once I was cleaned up and Evander was bundled in a tight swaddle, resting against my heart, the nurses cleared out, leaving only Linnea and me in the dim light of room 411. The silence was deafening. I'm going over there, Linnea said quietly, pulling her blazer tight around her shoulders. I'm going to find out exactly what is on the record. Linnea, don't let him see you. I panicked, my grip tightening on Evander. If he knows I'm here, if he comes in, he won't see me, she promised, her eyes dark and calculating. I'm going to the nurse's station. I'm going to look at the board. Just rest. She slipped out the heavy wooden door, leaving it open just a crack. I lay in the hospital bed, holding my son, staring at the ceiling tiles. I traced the water stains, counting the perforations, trying to force my brain to process the math. Kylia was due October 12th. I was due October 18th. Kylia had gotten pregnant around the exact same time I had. She claimed it was a one-night stand with a phantom named Declan, a man who ghosted her, a man who disconnected his number. There was no Declan. There never was a Declan. It was Vance. It had always been Vance. The protective instinct, the midnight rescue missions, the refusal to let me criticize her. He wasn't playing the supportive husband to my best friend. He was playing the devoted partner to his mistress. He was living two lives, under my roof, in my face, and I had handed him the keys to do it. I felt physically violently ill. The room spun. I pressed the cold plastic of the call button against my cheek to ground myself. 10 minutes later, Linnea slipped back into the room. She locked the door behind her with a sharp click. Her face was ashen. She walked over to the side of my bed and sat in the visitor's chair, leaning in close so her voice wouldn't carry. It's worse than we thought, she whispered. My stomach plummeted. Tell me. I went to the nurse's station. I pretended I was lost, looking for the cafeteria, and I got a clear view of the dry erase board where they list the patient details for that wing. Linnea swallowed hard. Elara. Kylia was admitted yesterday at 4 in the afternoon for an induction. Vance's name isn't listed as her emergency contact. What is he listed as? Linnea looked me dead in the eyes. The father. He signed the admittance paperwork. The baby is a girl. They named her Lily. Lily Vance. I stopped breathing. The air simply evaporated from the room. He didn't even try to hide it on the legal documents. He signed his name. He gave the child his first name as a middle name, a twisted badge of ownership. He was confident, so utterly, arrogantly certain that I was at the architecture firm, oblivious and docile, waiting for him to come home to our suburban life. He thought he had completely compartmentalized his two worlds. He never anticipated that my water would break a week early, forcing the universe to violently smash those two worlds together in the same hallway of Memorial Presbyterian. He's been here since yesterday, I whispered, the timeline slotting into place. He told me he had a regional conference in Milwaukee. He packed a bag. He kissed my forehead. He's a sociopath, Linnea stated, her voice trembling with cold rage. Elara, what do you want to do? I can call security. I can drag him by his collar into this room right now and make him look at what he missed. I will ruin him in front of that entire ward. For a split second, the temptation was intoxicating. I wanted to scream. I wanted to burst into room 412, holding his legitimate son, and burn their twisted, sick fantasy to the ground. I wanted to watch the blood drain from Kylia's face. I wanted to see Vance fall to his knees and beg. But then, I looked down at Evander. Evander was sleeping, his tiny chest rising and falling in a steady, peaceful rhythm. He was entirely dependent on me. If I blew this up right now, in a hospital gown, bleeding, exhausted, and emotionally shattered, what would happen? Vance was a master manipulator. He would twist it. He would claim Kylia needed him, that I was hysterical from childbirth. He would use his resources, his high-paying job, to drag me through a brutal divorce while I was on maternity leave, vulnerable and recovering. He had been planning this for months. I had known for exactly 2 hours. You do not go to war when your enemy is armed and you are bleeding. You go to war when you have the high ground. No, I said, my voice eerily calm. The tears stopped. A sudden, terrifying clarity washed over me, freezing the panic into solid ice. Linnea frowned. No? Alara, you can't be serious. You're not going to let him get away with this. I'm not letting him get away with anything, I said, looking up at her. But I'm not confronting him today. He doesn't know I'm here. He doesn't know I know. If I confront him now, he has time to hide money. He has time to spin the narrative to our friends. He has time to delete the evidence. Linnea's eyes widened as she realized what I was saying. A slow, respectful understanding dawned on her face. You want to trap him. I want to annihilate him, I corrected softly. And to do that, I need proof. I need access to his phone, his accounts, everything. I need to play the devoted wife who suspects nothing until the cage is completely locked. Before Linnea could respond, a shadow passed under the crack of my door. We both froze. Heavy footsteps stopped right outside room 411. His voice drifted through the wood, muffled but unmistakable. He was talking on his cell phone in the hallway. Yeah, the conference is wrapping up early. I should be back by tonight. I know. I miss her too. Tell Alara I'll call her when I'm on the road. The reception in this hotel is garbage. He was leaving a voicemail on our home answering machine, lying, building his alibi from 30 feet away. Then, the footsteps moved closer. The doorknob rattled. Linnea had locked it. Hello? A nurse's voice echoed in the hall. Sir, you can't linger here. Are you looking for someone? Oh, sorry. Vance's voice was smooth, charming. Just pacing, taking a walk. My wife is in 412. Just had a baby girl. My wife. He called her his wife. I bit down on the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted blood. Linnea grabbed my hand, squeezing it until her knuckles turned white. Congratulations, the nurse said warmly. By the way, if you're looking for coffee, the machine on this floor is broken. But there's one by the elevators. Thanks, Vance replied. Actually, I saw a name on the board at the station that caught my eye. Alara. Is there a patient named Alara here? My heart stopped beating. The monitor beside my bed gave a sudden, rapid flutter. I'm sorry, sir. I can't give out patient information, the nurse said firmly. Right, of course. HIPAA and all that. It's just an unusual name. Same as my sister's. Anyway, thanks for the coffee tip. The footsteps faded away toward the elevators. He didn't know for sure, but the seed of doubt had been planted. He saw my name on the admittance board. It was only a matter of time before he checked his own phone, saw the missed calls from Linnea's number, saw the text from me, and put the pieces together. He would realize his real wife was in the same hospital, giving birth to his son, while he was playing house with her best friend. Unlock the door, I whispered to Linnea. Alara, what are you doing? Unlock it. He's going to check his phone. He's going to come in here. And when he does, you have to back my play. No matter what I say, you agree. Linnea hesitated, then stood and quietly twisted the deadbolt. She sat back down, pulling her phone out and pretending to scroll, her posture rigid with barely suppressed hostility. We waited. 5 minutes. 10 minutes. The suspense was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to draw breath. I arranged my face. I practiced my expression. I wiped the tears from my cheeks and forced my mouth into a soft, exhausted, loving smile. The performance of a lifetime. Suddenly, the door burst open. Vance stood in the threshold. He looked disheveled, frantic, his eyes wide with a perfectly manufactured panic. He was panting, as if he had just sprinted up 4 flights of stairs. He looked at me in the hospital bed, then down at the bundle in my arms. Alara! He gasped, rushing into the room. He fell to his knees beside the bed, grabbing my free hand and pressing it to his lips. Oh my God. Oh my God, baby. I am so sorry. I am so sorry. I looked down at the man I had loved for 5 years. Up close, I could smell the distinct vanilla and amber scent of Kylia's perfume clinging to his collar. I could see a tiny smudge of pink hospital-grade lip balm on his jawline. And stuck to the lapel of his blazer was a neon yellow sticker that read, Visitor, Maternity Ward, 1011, yesterday's date. Vance, I breathed, letting my voice crack with manufactured emotion. You're here. My phone died. He lied effortlessly, looking up at me with tears in his eyes. I was in the conference center. The battery was completely dead. The second I got back to the hotel and plugged it in, I saw your texts. I saw Linnea's missed calls. I left everything in the room, rented a car, and drove 100 miles an hour to get here. I can't believe I missed it. I can't believe I wasn't here for you. He was brilliant. If I hadn't seen him through the glass, if Linnea hadn't read the board, I would have believed every single word. He sold the panic, the guilt, the devotion with absolute perfection. It's okay, I whispered, reaching out to stroke his hair, mimicking the exact gesture Kylia had performed 40 feet away. You're here now. He stood up, leaning over the bed to look at Evander. A look of genuine awe crossed his face. For a moment, the manipulator vanished, replaced by a father meeting his son. He reached out a trembling finger and stroked Evander's cheek. He's beautiful, Vance choked out. He looks just like you. We named him Evander, I said softly. Vance nodded, tears spilling down his cheeks. Evander, my boy. He leaned down and kissed my forehead. I promise you, Alara, I will never, ever let you down again. I will be the best father, the best husband. I am so lucky to have you. I looked at the yellow visitor sticker on his lapel. I looked at the man who had just promised me the world while actively living in another one. I know you will, Vance, I said, smiling a smile that did not reach my eyes. I know exactly what kind of husband you are. Linnea cleared her throat from the corner of the room. Vance jumped, apparently just realizing she was there. He immediately pulled back, running a hand through his hair, playing the embarrassed, overwhelmed new father. Linnea, Vance said, his voice thick with fake gratitude. Thank you. Thank you so much for bringing her here, for being with her when I couldn't be. Don't mention it, Linnea said smoothly, though her eyes were dead, staring at him like he was a specimen under glass. Someone had to step up. Vance didn't catch the venom. He was too busy surviving his own lie. He pulled out his phone, the phone that had supposedly been dead, and looked at it. I should call my parents. I should tell them. Take your time, I said pleasantly. You must be exhausted from the drive. I am, he sighed, rubbing his eyes. It was a nightmare trying to get here. But I'm not leaving this room. I'm staying right here with you and my son. He sat down in the chair next to the bed. He held my hand. He played the part flawlessly. And for the next 2 days in that hospital, we performed a grotesque silent ballet. Vance would sit with me for a few hours, cooing over Evander, playing the devoted husband. Then, his phone would vibrate. He would look at the screen, furrow his brow, and sigh. Work, he would say apologetically. My regional manager is furious. I bolted from the conference. I need to take this in the hall. I'll be right back. He would leave the room. He would walk 30 feet down the corridor, push open the door to room 412, and play the devoted father to Kaelia and their daughter, Lily. I knew because Linnea stayed with me the entire time. When Vance left to take his work calls, Linnea would slip out and watch from the nurse's station. She reported his movements with militaristic precision. He just went into 412, Linnea whispered on Thursday afternoon, returning from her reconnaissance. He's carrying a pink balloon and a teddy bear he bought from the gift shop downstairs. I was nursing Evander. My heart turned entirely to stone. Did he look happy? He looked like a man juggling chainsaws, Linnea replied grimly. He's terrified. He knows how close you two are. If you walk out of this room and bump into Kaelia in the hallway, his entire life detonates. He'll make sure that doesn't happen, I said, burping Evander softly. He'll arrange the discharges perfectly. And he did. On Friday morning, Vance came into my room, rubbing his neck. Hey, baby, he said, forcing a smile. So, I talked to the doctor. They said you and Evander are doing amazing, but they want to keep you one more night just to monitor his jaundice levels. Nothing to worry about, just standard procedure. I knew for a fact the pediatrician had cleared Evander to go home that afternoon. Vance had convinced them to keep me. Why? That's fine, I said easily. What about you? Well, Vance hesitated, looking deeply conflicted. I need to go home and prep the house. Clean up, set up the bassinet, get everything perfect for when you bring him home tomorrow. Plus, Kaelia called me this morning. She's in a total panic. I raised an eyebrow, keeping my expression perfectly neutral. Oh? Is she okay? She had the baby, Vance said, feigning surprise and mild concern. A little girl. But she's completely alone, Alara. Declan never showed up. She's being discharged today, and she doesn't even have a car seat installed. I told her I'd swing by, help her get the baby home, and then I'll spend the rest of the night getting our house ready for you." It was a masterpiece of manipulation. He was using his mistress's fabricated victimhood to secure a hall pass to move his illegitimate child into her apartment, all while playing the hero to his oblivious wife. "You're such a good friend, Vance," I said, my voice dripping with honey. "You should absolutely go help her. She needs you." He looked relieved, so unbelievably relieved. He kissed me, kissed Evander, and left the hospital to take his other family home. The moment the door closed, I pulled out my phone. I didn't call a lawyer yet. I didn't call my parents. I opened the browser and searched for private investigators in the Chicago area. I found a firm that specialized in asset tracking and infidelity. I sent an email from a secure, encrypted account I had set up from my hospital bed the night before. The game had officially begun. And Vance didn't even know he was on the board. I came home on a crisp Saturday morning. Vance picked me up from the hospital in the Audi, a bouquet of pale yellow roses resting on the passenger seat. He had installed the infant car seat flawlessly. He drove with exaggerated care, one hand on the steering wheel, the other reaching over to squeeze my knee. "I can't believe we're finally doing this," he said, glancing at Evander, sleeping soundly in the back. Our family, I echoed, my tone light, my stomach churning. When we walked into the house, it was immaculate. The floors were swept, the laundry was done, the bassinet was positioned perfectly next to my side of the bed. He had even stocked the fridge with my favorite pre-made meals from a local bistro. It was the performance of a man desperately trying to overcompensate, trying to buy his own innocence with acts of service. For the next 4 weeks, my life became an exercise in extreme psychological endurance. I was recovering from childbirth, sleep-deprived, nursing around the clock, and hormonal. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to throw his clothes onto the lawn, to scream Kaelia's name, to shatter the delicate glass house he had built around us. But I couldn't. I needed hard, undeniable proof. I needed financial records. I needed the smoking gun that would secure my future and Evander's, leaving Vance with absolutely nothing. The private investigator, a retired cop named Russo, called me on a burner phone I had purchased with cash and hidden at the bottom of the diaper pail. "He's sloppy, Mrs. Sterling," Russo said during our first check-in, the static of the line crackling. "Guys living double lives usually are. They get arrogant." I pulled his credit card statements for the last 9 months. The one he thinks you don't know about. The Capital One card attached to a P.O. box in the city. I closed my eyes, bouncing Evander on my shoulder as he fussed. "What's on it?" "Everything. Prenatal vitamins, maternity clothes from a boutique in Wicker Park, an $800 crib from Pottery Barn." He also co-signed the lease on her new apartment, the one he supposedly helped her find. "It's not her apartment, Mrs. Sterling. It's theirs. Half the rent is automatically deducted from a separate checking account he opened last year." The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was deeply, violently financial. He was siphoning marital assets, my money, the money I earned as an architect to fund his secret life with Kaelia. "I need the documentation, Russo. All of it. I need the lease, the bank statements, the credit card bills. I need photos of him entering and leaving the building." "You'll have it by the end of the week," Russo promised. "But there's something else. Something you should know before you proceed." "What?" Russo cleared his throat. I looked into the paternity. He didn't just sign the hospital admittance form, he signed the birth certificate. Lily is legally his daughter. Which means, in the state of Illinois, if you divorce him, his child support obligations will be split between you and Kaelia based on income. I gripped the burner phone so tightly the plastic creaked. Kaelia was unemployed. She was claiming poverty. If we divorced right now, Vance would be legally obligated to pay her more child support than he would pay me, simply because I made more money. I would be subsidizing my husband's mistress for the next 18 years. "Understood," I said coldly. "Keep digging." I hung up, buried the phone back under the scented diaper bags, and walked into the living room. Vance was sitting on the couch, laptop open, typing furiously. "Hey," he said, smiling up at me. "Evander finally down?" "Just went to sleep," I said, sitting beside him, leaning my head on his shoulder. I forced myself to inhale his scent. I forced myself to play the devoted wife. "What are you working on?" "Just some budget projections for the region," he lied smoothly, closing out of a browser tab a second too late. I caught a glimpse of it. It was a baby registry for Kaelia. "Hey, speaking of," Kaelia texted me earlier. "She's really struggling, Alara. The baby has colic, she hasn't slept, and she has no money for formula. She asked if we could loan her $1,000. just to get through the month. He was testing me. He was trying to use my money to fund the gap in his secret account. I looked at him, my expression a mask of sympathetic concern. $1,000? Vance, that's a lot of money. We just paid for the hospital bills. I know, he sighed, running a hand through his hair. But she's your best friend. She's practically family. And that little girl, Lily, she doesn't deserve to suffer because Declan is a deadbeat. It's the Christian thing to do, Alara. He weaponized my empathy. He weaponized our friendship. You're right, I said softly, reaching out to touch his cheek. She needs us. Transfer the money from the joint savings. Let's help her out. Vance's shoulders relaxed visibly. You're an angel, Alara. Seriously, I don't deserve you. No, I agreed, smiling sweetly. You don't. The next day, Kaelia came to visit. It was the first time she had been to the house since the babies were born. She arrived looking like a tragic heroine. She wore an oversized sweater, her hair in a messy bun, dark circles expertly highlighted beneath her eyes. She was carrying Lily in a cheap second-hand car seat. Alara, Kaelia gasped, dropping the car seat in the foyer and throwing her arms around me. She smelled like baby powder and Vance's deodorant. I missed you so much. I've been so isolated. I missed you too, Kay, I said, patting her back. Let me see her. Let me see Lily. Kaelia unbuckled the straps, lifting the baby out. Lily was beautiful. She had Vance's nose. She had Vance's jawline. Looking at her was like looking at a ghost. She's precious, I said, my voice steady. She looks just like… Well, she doesn't look much like you, does she? Kaelia laughed nervously. A high, brittle sound. She looks like her terrible father, unfortunately. But we don't talk about him. Right, Declan. Declan, Kaelia confirmed quickly. She looked around the living room. Where's Vance? I wanted to thank him in person for the loan. You guys saved my life. He's in the home office on a conference call, I said, gesturing toward the hallway. But I'm sure he'd love to see you. Why don't you go say hi? I'll watch Lily. Evander is asleep in the nursery. Kaelia's eyes lit up. Are you sure? Absolutely. Go. I watched her walk down the hallway. The moment she disappeared into the office, the door clicked shut, not latched, locked. I stood in the living room, holding my husband's illegitimate daughter, and pulled my phone from my pocket. I opened the baby monitor app. 3 days prior, I had purchased a second camera. I told Vance I wanted to put one in the living room so I could watch Evander while I was cooking in the kitchen. He had installed it himself. What he didn't know was that I had purchased a third camera, a tiny motion-activated nanny cam, and hidden it inside the binding of a thick encyclopedia on the bookshelf in his home office. I stared at the screen on my phone. The black and white night vision clicked to color. Kaelia was standing in the center of the office. Vance had pushed back from his desk. He didn't look like a man on a conference call. He looked like a man starving. Kaelia practically climbed into his lap. She threw her arms around his neck, burying her face in his shoulder. Vance wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her tight against him, burying his face in her neck. God, I miss you, Vance groaned, the audio picking up his voice crystal clear. I hate this. I hate pretending. Then stop pretending, Kaelia whispered fiercely, kissing his jaw, his cheek, his mouth. Leave her, Vance. You promised me. You said once the babies were born, you'd figure out a way to leave her without losing your shirt. I can't keep living in that apartment alone. Lily needs her father. I know, baby, I know, Vance said, stroking her hair. But I need time. Alara makes too much money. If I leave now, her lawyers will bury me. I need to move some assets. I need to make sure I secure my bonus next quarter before I file. Just give me 3 more months. By Christmas, we'll be together. I stood in the living room holding Lily. My heart didn't break. It calcified. It turned into something hard, cold, and utterly unforgiving. He wasn't just cheating, he was plotting. He was planning to blindside me, drain our accounts, and leave me as a single mother while he rode off into the sunset with my best friend. 3 months, Kaelia pouted on the screen, trailing a finger down his chest. You better make it worth it. She was so smug when she handed over that $1,000, like she's some kind of saint. Let her play the saint, Vance sneered, kissing her again. She's funding our future and she doesn't even know it. I hit save on the recording. The file uploaded directly to a secure cloud server, instantly shared with Russo and Linnea. I set Lily down in her bouncy seat. I walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of ice water, and took a deep, steadying breath. When Kaelia emerged from the office 10 minutes later, her lipstick was slightly smeared, her cheeks flushed. Vance trailed behind her, looking perfectly composed, the devoted family man once again. Hey, Vance said, walking over to kiss my cheek. Sorry, that call ran long. Good to see you, Kay. Good to see you too, Vance, Kylia beamed. And thank you again. For everything. Of course, I said, smiling at them both. What are best friends for? For the next 2 months, I played the ultimate long game. I became the perfect wife. I cooked his favorite meals. I encouraged him to spend more time helping Kaelia, giving him the rope he needed to hang himself. I smiled through the exhaustion. I smiled through the rage. I smiled while I methodically dismantled his entire financial existence. Linnea, who had a brother in corporate law, referred me to a shark named Harrington. Harrington didn't just practice divorce law, he practiced scorched earth litigation. I met Harrington in his downtown office on a Tuesday while Vance thought I was at a mommy and me yoga class. I laid the thick dossier Russo had compiled on the mahogany desk. I handed him a flash drive containing the home office videos, the Capital One statements, the lease agreement, and the birth certificate Vance had signed. Harrington, a silver-haired man with eyes like chips of flint, reviewed the files in silence. For 20 minutes, the only sound in the office was the turning of pages and the ticking of a grandfather clock. Finally, Harrington closed the folder. He looked up at me. Mrs. Sterling, your husband is a fool, but he is a fool who has committed marital fraud, dissipation of assets, and perjury on a mortgage application he recently filed. A mortgage application? I frowned. Harrington nodded, sliding a document toward me. He applied for a mortgage on a 4-bedroom house in Naperville last week. He listed himself as the sole borrower, but he used your joint tax returns to qualify for the income requirements. He also forged your signature on a spousal waiver, claiming you relinquished all rights to the property. My blood ran cold. The Naperville house. The future he was building for Kaelia with my money. He's planning to close right before Christmas, Harrington explained quietly. He intends to move her in, drain the joint accounts, and serve you with papers the second the ink is dry. He thinks he's a genius. Can we stop him? Harrington smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of an apex predator. Stop him? No. We are going to let him close. We are going to let him sink every dime of his personal bonus and his secret accounts into the down payment. And the day he gets the keys, we are going to freeze his assets, file for emergency custody, and hit him with a civil suit for fraud that will alert his employer to his financial misconduct. If his employer finds out he committed mortgage fraud, they'll fire him, I said, the realization dawning on me. Vance worked in logistics management. He handled millions in corporate contracts. He required a spotless financial background check. Exactly, Harrington said smoothly. And if he is fired for cause, his child support obligations to Kaelia will be calculated on his new income, which will be zero. But because he dissipated marital assets to fund his affair, the court will award you the lion's share of the remaining estate to make you whole. He will be left with nothing. She will be left with nothing. I looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows of the law firm, watching the Chicago traffic crawl far below. I thought about the day my water broke. I thought about the blinding pain, the fear, the desperation of calling my husband. I thought about the red decline button. I thought about him sitting 40 feet away, kissing Kaelia's temple while I screamed for him. Do it, I said, my voice hard as diamonds. Burn him to the ground. The trap was set. Now, I just had to wait for December. Thanksgiving came and went. We hosted dinner at our house. My parents were there. Vance's parents were there. Kaelia was there, playing the tragic single mother. Vance sat at the head of the table, carving the turkey, laughing, pouring wine. He made a toast to family, loyalty, and the blessings of the past year. I raised my glass, smiling across the table at Kaelia. To loyalty, I echoed, taking a sip of Pinot Noir. Kaelia caught my eye and smiled, a smug, secret little smirk that she quickly hid behind her wine glass. She thought she was so clever. She thought she had won the grand prize. She had no idea the prize was rigged with explosives. December 18th, the day of the closing. Vance was practically buzzing with nervous energy that morning. He kissed me deeply before leaving for work. His eyes bright. I have a big meeting today, Alara. Huge. I might be late tonight, but I promise we'll celebrate this weekend. I love you. Good luck, I said, adjusting his tie. I'm sure you'll get exactly what you deserve. He left. The second his Audi pulled out of the driveway, I called Harrington. He's on his way, I said. The paperwork is filed, Harrington replied. The asset freeze goes into effect at 1 p.m. The process server is waiting outside the title company. Happy holidays, Mrs. Sterling. I hung up the phone. I packed a suitcase for myself and Evander. I didn't take much, just enough for a few days at my parents' house while the dust settled. I left the house immaculate. I left the nursery perfect. I walked into Vance's home office, took the flash drive containing the nanny cam footage, and placed it squarely in the center of his desk, right next to his keyboard. Then, I drove to Kaelia's apartment. I didn't knock. I used the spare key Vance had secretly had cut, the one I found in his gym bag and copied before returning it. I opened the door. Kaelia was standing in the living room, packing boxes. She froze when she saw me. The color drained from her face so fast I thought she might pass out. "Alara?" she stammered, dropping a stack of bubble wrap. "What? What are you doing here? How did you get in?" I walked slowly into the living room, looking at the moving boxes. "Packing for Naperville, Kay?" Her breath hitched. She backed up a step, her eyes darting toward the door. I don't know what you're talking about. 4 bedrooms. Granite countertops. Great school district," I recited calmly, folding my arms. "It's a beautiful house. It's a shame Vance won't be able to pay the mortgage on it after today." Kaelia's bravado shattered. The mask fell, revealing the terrified, opportunistic coward underneath. "Alara, wait. Let me explain. It's not what you think. Declan." "Stop," I said, my voice echoing in the empty apartment. "Don't say that name again. I know about Vance. I've known since October. I saw you through the window at Memorial Presbyterian. I watched him kiss you while I was giving birth to his son." Kaelia burst into tears. Not the fake, theatrical tears she used to manipulate me. These were real, ugly, desperate tears. She dropped to her knees, sobbing violently. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Alara. He pursued me. He told me he was unhappy. He told me your marriage was a mistake. I didn't want to hurt you, I swear to God." "You didn't want to hurt me?" I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "You moved into my house. You slept with my husband. You let me fund your life, buy your groceries, loan you money, while you planned to steal the father of my child. You didn't just want to hurt me, Kaelia. You wanted to destroy me." "I was desperate," she cried, crawling toward me, reaching for my ankles. I stepped back, disgusted. "I was pregnant and alone. He promised he would take care of us. He promised we would be a family." "Well," I said, looking down at her, "he kept half his promise. You're a family now, but you're about to be a very broke one." I pulled a manila envelope out of my purse and tossed it onto the floor beside her. "That's a copy of the emergency asset freeze Harrington filed this morning. Vance's bank accounts are locked. His credit cards are suspended. The down payment for the Naperville house cleared, but the title is currently frozen due to the fraud investigation. And speaking of fraud, his employer was notified of the forged mortgage documents 20 minutes ago. He's being escorted out of the building by security as we speak." Kaelia stared at the envelope like it was a live grenade. She stopped crying. The reality of the situation crashed over her in a tidal wave of ruin. He's fired?" "He's fired," I confirmed. "Which means his income is zero. Which means your child support payments are going to be practically non-existent. Good luck paying rent on that 4-bedroom house, Kay." I turned toward the door. "Alara, please!" she screamed, scrambling to her feet. "You can't do this! What about Lily? She's innocent." I paused with my hand on the doorknob. I didn't turn around. Lily is innocent, but her parents are monsters. Figure it out. I walked out of the apartment, locking the door behind me. At 1:15 p.m., my phone rang. It was Vance. I answered it, putting it on speakerphone as I drove toward my parents' house, Evander sleeping peacefully in his car seat. "Alara!" Vance shouted, his voice high-pitched, manic, completely unhinged. "Alara, where are you? My cards are declining." Security just walked me out of the office. They said something about a fraud investigation. "I don't understand what's happening. Did you get hacked? Call the bank." I listened to his panic. I let it wash over me. It was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. "I didn't get hacked, Vance," I said calmly. "I called the bank. I called Harrington. I called your HR department." The line went dead silent, the kind of silence that precedes an implosion. "What?" he breathed. "I know," I said. "I've known since October. I watched you sign the birth certificate for Lily. I know about the Capital One card. I know about the Naperville house. I know you forged my signature on the spousal waiver. Baby, wait, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. I cut him off, my voice turning to ice. I understand you declined my call while I was in labor so you could hold your mistress's hand. I understand you planned to blindside me and steal my money to fund your secret life. But you underestimated me, Vance. You thought because I was quiet, I was stupid. You thought because I was kind, I was weak. Alara, please. I love you. It meant nothing. She meant nothing. It was a mistake. He turned on Kaelia in less than 30 seconds. The devoted protector instantly became the rat fleeing the sinking ship. Save it for the judge, I said. You're going to need a good lawyer, Vance. Pity you can't afford one anymore. You can't do this to me, he screamed, his facade completely shattering. I am the father of your son. You are ruining my life. No, I replied softly. You ruined your life. I just provided the paperwork. I hung up the phone. I blocked his number. I drove the rest of the way to my parents' house in absolute silence, feeling lighter than I had in 3 years. The fallout of a detonated life does not settle quietly like dust. It falls like shrapnel, tearing through everything it touches. My parents lived in a quiet, affluent suburb of Evanston, in a limestone house enveloped by old oak trees. It was the house I grew up in, a fortress of predictability and warmth. When I walked through the front door carrying Evander's car seat, my mother took one look at my face and knew. She didn't ask questions. She just took her grandson from my arms, kissed my forehead, and guided me to the sofa. I sat down and, for the first time since my water broke in the drafting room 2 months prior, I let myself break. I cried until my ribs bruised. I cried until my throat was raw. My father, a retired structural engineer who rarely spoke more than a few sentences at dinner, sat beside me and held my hand with a grip like a vice. He's done, my father said quietly, staring straight ahead at the fireplace. It wasn't a threat. It was an absolute, immutable law of physics. I will break him into pieces so small the wind won't even find him. You don't have to, Dad, I whispered, resting my head on his shoulder. I already did. But desperate people do not surrender simply because they have been outplayed. They pivot. They mutate. At 7 o'clock that evening, the heavy oak front door of my parents' house rattled violently. Someone was pounding on the wood with closed fists, the impacts echoing through the quiet foyer. Elara, open the door. Elara, please, I know you're in there. Vance's voice was muffled through the thick wood, but the hysterical, frantic pitch was unmistakable. He had lost his job, his money, and his secret house all within a 4-hour window. Now, he was desperately trying to secure his last remaining asset, me. My father stood up slowly from his armchair. He didn't rush. He walked to the hall closet, retrieved a heavy brass walking stick he kept for winter hikes, and moved toward the door. Dad, don't, I said, my heart hammering against my ribs. I'll call the police. Let him see my face, my father replied calmly, unlocking the deadbolt and pulling the door open. Vance stumbled forward, his tailored suit wrinkled, his tie loosened and hanging crookedly around his neck. His eyes were bloodshot, his hair wildly unkempt. The pristine, polished regional director was gone, replaced by a cornered, frantic animal. He tried to push his way into the foyer, but my father planted the brass tip of the walking stick squarely in the center of Vance's chest, stopping him cold. Mr. Sterling, Vance stammered, holding his hands up defensively. I just need to see my wife. I just need to talk to Alara. There has been a massive misunderstanding. She's upset, she's postpartum, she isn't thinking clearly. If you finish that sentence, my father interrupted, his voice dropping to a terrifying, gravelly octave. I will cave your teeth in on my front porch, and I will sleep like a baby tonight. Step back. Vance blinked, genuinely shocked. He was so used to manipulating his way out of corners, so used to playing the charming, misunderstood victim, that the blunt force of my father's hatred visibly disoriented him. Alara! Vance screamed, looking past my father to where I stood in the hallway, holding Evander tightly against my chest. Baby, please, you're letting your imagination run wild. Kaelia is crazy. She's obsessed with me. She made the whole thing up. I only signed that birth certificate because she threatened to ruin my career if I didn't help her. I was protecting us. Have you ever watched a parasite realize its host has died? It is a fascinating, grotesque spectacle. He was throwing Kaelia entirely under the bus, framing her as an unstable stalker who had blackmailed him into fatherhood. He was willing to discard the woman he had secretly loved, the woman he had bought a house for, in a desperate, flailing attempt to regain access to my bank accounts. I saw the video from the nanny cam, Vance, I said, my voice cutting through the foyer like a frozen wire. Vance froze. The color instantly drained from his face, leaving him a sickly waxen gray. I heard you tell her you hated pretending with me, I continued, stepping slightly closer, though staying behind the protective barrier of my father. I heard you tell her you were going to blindside me and take my money to fund your life together. I heard you call me a saint who was funding your future and didn't even know it. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The lies caught in his throat, suffocated by the irrefutable reality of the footage. He couldn't gaslight a video recording. I've called the police, my mother announced, stepping out of the kitchen with the cordless phone in her hand. They will be here in 3 minutes. You are trespassing. Vance looked at me, his expression twisting from panic into something dark, ugly, and venomous. The mask was fully off now. The charming husband evaporated, leaving the sociopath completely exposed. You think you're so smart, Alara, he sneered, his voice trembling with venom. You think you can just erase me? I am Evander's father. I have rights. You are going to pay me alimony. You make 3 times what I make, and now I'm unemployed. You are going to write me a check every month for the rest of your life, and I am going to spend it on whatever I want. Get off my property, my father commanded, stepping forward and shoving Vance backward with the brass stick. Vance stumbled down the porch steps, nearly losing his balance on the frost-covered stone. He pointed a shaking finger at me. This isn't over. I'll see you in court, you cold. Arrogant. The wail of a police siren in the distance cut him off. Vance spun around, sprinting toward his Audi parked haphazardly on the curb. He peeled out, the tires screeching against the asphalt, fleeing into the night. I closed the door, my knees trembling violently now that the adrenaline was fading. My mother wrapped her arms around me, holding me as I buried my face in her shoulder. Vance's threat echoed in my mind. You are going to pay me alimony. He was right about the law, in theory. In Illinois, a significantly higher-earning spouse can be forced to pay maintenance to an unemployed partner, regardless of infidelity. The court doesn't usually care who slept with whom. They care about spreadsheets and income disparity. He was banking on the legal system to reward his betrayal with a monthly stipend funded by my late nights at the architecture firm. The next morning, I called Harrington. I repeated Vance's threat verbatim. Harrington chuckled. It was a dry, rasping sound, like sandpaper on mahogany. Let him dream, Mrs. Sterling. Alimony is designed for spouses who contribute to the marital estate, not spouses who actively defraud it. By forging your signature on a mortgage application to purchase property for a paramour, he didn't just cheat. He committed financial crimes. I am filing for a disproportionate share of the marital estate due to his dissipation of assets. He won't get a dime of your future earnings. In fact, he's going to owe you the money he spent on her. While Harrington prepared the legal guillotine, Kaelia launched a different kind of war, the social one. 3 days after the implosion, my phone started buzzing relentlessly. Texts from mutual college friends, messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years, notifications pinging in rapid succession. Linnea called me. Don't open Instagram, she warned immediately. Why? What did she do? She went nuclear. She posted a 15-minute video. She's playing the ultimate victim. I didn't listen to Linnea. I opened the app. There was Kaelia, sitting on the floor of her apartment, cradling Lily. She was wearing no makeup, her hair a messy halo, tears streaming down her face. She looked like a martyr painting. I didn't want to bring this to the internet, Kaelia sobbed to the camera, her voice cracking perfectly on cue. But I have been left completely destitute by a woman I thought was my sister. Alara Sterling has used her wealth and her high-priced lawyers to freeze the bank accounts of the man who stepped up to be a father to my child. She is trying to evict a single mother and a newborn baby right before Christmas, just because she's jealous that her husband finally found true love. We made a mistake, yes, but we are human. And Alara is trying to starve us out. She is a cold, heartless monster. The comments were a bloodbath, hundreds of them. People we had gone to college with were calling me a psycho, a corporate ice queen, a villain. Kaelia had expertly weaponized my success, painting me as the cruel, wealthy overlord crushing the impoverished, star-crossed lovers. My phone buzzed with a text from a girl named Sarah, who had lived across the hall from us sophomore year. I can't believe you would do this to a baby, Alara. You need serious help. I stared at the screen, my blood boiling. I wanted to post the nanny cam footage. I wanted to post the receipts of the thousands of dollars I had given her. I wanted to scream the truth into the digital void. I took a screenshot of Sarah's message and sent it to Linnea. "Let them talk," Linnea texted back immediately. "Lions do not lose sleep over the opinions of sheep. Do not engage. You engage. You look crazy. You stay silent. You look untouchable." Linnea was right. Silence is a mirror. If you don't react, the other person's reflection eventually reveals their own madness. But I didn't have to stay completely silent behind closed doors. I forwarded the link of Kaelia's video to Harrington. "Does this violate the temporary restraining order regarding public harassment?" I typed. Harrington replied 3 minutes later. "It certainly does. And it also constitutes a public admission of the affair and the financial support she received from your husband. She just handed us a signed confession for the civil suit. I am submitting this to the judge as Exhibit F." Kaelia thought she was winning the court of public opinion. She didn't realize she was actively sinking her own legal defense. The first emergency hearing took place the second week of January. The courthouse was a sprawling, brutalist concrete building downtown. The air inside smelled of floor wax and quiet desperation. I wore a tailored navy suit, my hair pulled back into a severe bun. I looked exactly like the corporate ice queen Kaelia had accused me of being, and I wore it like armor. I sat at the petitioner's table with Harrington. The heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom swung open, and Vance walked in. I almost didn't recognize him. He looked like he had aged 5 years and a month. He was wearing a suit that used to fit him perfectly, but now hung loosely on his frame, as if the stress had physically consumed him. He walked to the respondent's table alone. He couldn't afford a high-powered attorney because his assets were frozen, and his credit was destroyed by the mortgage fraud flag. He had hired a bargain basement divorce lawyer who looked like he had slept in his car. Vance wouldn't look at me. He stared down at the table, his hands trembling slightly. The judge, a stern, no-nonsense woman named Honorable Beatrice Carver, took the bench. She had already reviewed the filings, the financial records, and the nanny cam transcript. She adjusted her glasses and looked down at Vance with an expression of profound, surgical disgust. "Mr. Sterling," Judge Carver began, her voice echoing in the cavernous room, "I have presided over family court for 22 years. I have seen infidelity. I have seen hidden bank accounts. But I must say, the sheer audacity of your actions is breathtaking." Vance's cheap lawyer stood up, clearing his throat nervously. "Your Honor, my client acknowledges he made errors in judgment regarding his fidelity. However, the freezing of all assets has left him completely unable to secure housing or provide for his other minor child. We ask that the freeze be lifted so he can access his personal bonus." Harrington stood up, smooth and lethal. "Your Honor, that personal bonus was deposited into an account holding commingled marital funds, which the respondent then attempted to use to fraudulently close on a property with a paramour, forging my client's signature in the process. Releasing those funds would reward criminal behavior." "I agree," Judge Carver snapped. She looked at Vance. "You forged your wife's signature to buy a house for your mistress. You siphoned marital funds to pay her rent. You did this while your wife was pregnant with your child. The asset freeze remains in full effect until a comprehensive forensic accounting of the marital estate is completed." "Your Honor, please," Vance blurted out, standing up, his composure cracking. "I have no money. I'm living in a motel. I lost my job because she called my employer and told them about the mortgage application. She orchestrated this to ruin me." Judge Carver slammed her gavel down, the sound cracking like a gunshot. "You ruined yourself, sir, when you committed fraud. Do not blame your wife for the consequences of your own deceit." She turned her attention to the custody arrangement. Given the respondent's current lack of stable housing, lack of employment, and demonstrated deceit, temporary sole physical and legal custody of the minor child, Evander, is awarded to the petitioner. "Mr. Sterling, you are granted 2 hours of supervised visitation per week at a court-approved facility. You are also ordered to pay interim child support based on your imputed earning capacity, regardless of your current unemployed status." Vance slumped into his chair, burying his face in his hands. It was an absolute, unmitigated slaughter. As we walked out of the courtroom, Vance intercepted us in the hallway. Harrington immediately stepped between us, but Vance ignored him, his hollow, bloodshot eyes locked onto mine. "Are you happy, Alara?" he rasped, his voice trembling with a mixture of hatred and profound despair. "You took my son. You took my career. You took everything." I stopped walking. I looked at the man I had once planned to spend the rest of my life with. I didn't feel rage anymore. I didn't feel sadness. I felt nothing but a cold, clinical indifference. I didn't take anything, Vance, I said evenly. I just stopped paying for it. You were never a husband. You were a parasite. And now, you have to survive on your own. I turned and walked away, the click of my heels echoing down the marble corridor, leaving him standing in the wreckage he had built. But the destruction was only half complete. Kaelia was still out there. And Kaelia, unlike Vance, was not a planner. She was a reactor. And reactors are dangerous when they are cornered. A week later, Russo called me on the burner phone. Things are getting ugly over in Wicker Park, Mrs. Sterling, Russo reported. The sound of a car engine idled in the background of his call. Vance couldn't pay the rent on Kaelia's apartment. The landlord posted a 3-day pay-or-quit notice on her door yesterday. Vance tried to move into the apartment with her, since he's living out of his car now. She wouldn't let him in. I paused, sipping a cup of coffee at my parents' kitchen island. She locked him out? Total meltdown. Russo chuckled darkly. I got it on audio from the hallway. She screamed at him that he was useless, that he promised her a house in Naperville and a millionaire lifestyle, and instead, he brought her an eviction notice. She threw a diaper bag at his head and told him not to come back until he had cash. The romance of the century had lasted exactly as long as my bank account had funded it. The moment the money dried up, the true nature of their bond was exposed. They didn't love each other. Kaelia loved the security Vance promised her, and Vance loved the ego stroke Kaelia provided him. Without my money acting as the glue, they were two drowning people frantically trying to climb on top of one another to survive. Keep an eye on her, Russo, I said. She's not going to just accept an eviction. She's going to try something desperate. My instinct was terrifyingly accurate. It happened 3 days later. I had returned to work at the architecture firm part-time, needing the routine, the structure, the absolute logic of mathematics and blueprints to ground me. I was standing at the large drafting table in the center of the open plan office, reviewing a rendering with Linnea, when the heavy glass doors of the firm swung open. Kaelia marched into the lobby. She looked manic. She was wearing an oversized trench coat, her hair wild, pushing a stroller with Lily inside. She didn't stop at the receptionist's desk. She bypassed security entirely, her eyes scanning the room until they locked onto me. "Alara!" she screamed, her voice shrill and echoing off the vaulted ceilings. Dozens of my coworkers stopped what they were doing, heads popping up from cubicles. Linnea stepped in front of me immediately, her stance wide. "Security," Linnea barked toward the front desk. "Call building security now." Kaelia ignored Linnea, pushing the stroller aggressively forward until she was 10 feet away from us. She looked deranged, her eyes wide, a frantic, dangerous energy radiating off her. "You think you won?" Kaelia shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You think you can just throw me and my daughter onto the street? The landlord locked us out today, Alara. We are homeless because of you. You are homeless because you don't have a job, Kaelia, and the married man paying your rent got caught," I said, my voice deliberately calm, refusing to match her hysteria. "He loves me!" she screamed, tears of rage spilling down her cheeks. "He never loved you. You were just a bank to him. You are a cold, unlovable robot, and he told me every single night how much he dreaded going home to you." The office was dead silent. Every single architect, intern, and administrative assistant was listening. She was trying to humiliate me in my professional sanctuary. She wanted me to break down, to scream, to show everyone the monster she had claimed I was on social media. I stepped out from behind Linnea. I walked slowly toward Kaelia, stopping just a few feet from the stroller. I looked down at Lily. The baby was sleeping peacefully, completely unaware of the chaos swirling above her. She looked so much like Evander. It broke my heart, a tiny fractured ache for an innocent child born into a toxic nightmare. I looked up at Kaelia. "Did he tell you that?" I asked quietly, my voice carrying clearly through the silent room. "Did he tell you he dreaded coming home to me?" "Yes," Kaelia spat, a vicious, triumphant smile twisting her face. "He told me he had to force himself to touch you." "That's interesting," I replied, tilting my head slightly. "Because the night my water broke, the night you were in the hospital giving birth to Lily, he left you a voicemail from the hallway." Kaelia's triumphant smile faltered, her brow furrowed. "What?" "He called our home answering machine," I said, the memory crystal clear. He said, "I miss you. I love you. I can't wait to be home." Then, the next day, when he found out I was in the same hospital, he fell to his knees beside my bed. He kissed my hand. He begged for my forgiveness. He told me you were a mistake, Kaelia. He told me you meant absolutely nothing to him. Kaelia physically recoiled, as if I had slapped her across the face. You're lying. You're a liar. I'm not, I said softly, delivering the final, fatal blow. And when he showed up at my parents' house last week, begging me to take him back, he told me you blackmailed him. He told me you were an unstable stalker who threatened his career if he didn't sign Lily's birth certificate. No, Kaelia shrieked, pressing her hands over her ears. No, 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 he wouldn't say that. He's a parasite, Kay, I said, leaning in slightly, my voice dropping so only she could hear the absolute truth of it. He fed on my money, and he fed on your adoration. Now my money is gone, and he's realized your adoration doesn't pay the rent. He threw you away the second he realized you were a liability. The elevator doors dinged open behind her. 2 burly building security guards stepped out, walking quickly toward us. Kaelia looked at me, her eyes wide with a horrifying, crushing realization. She wasn't the star of a tragic romance. She wasn't the grand prize. She was just the collateral damage of a sociopath who had gotten caught. Ma'am, you need to come with us, one of the security guards said, placing a firm hand on Kaelia's shoulder. She didn't fight them. The fight had completely drained out of her. She looked at me one last time, her expression utterly shattered, hollowed out from the inside. She gripped the handle of the stroller and let the guards escort her toward the elevators. Her shoulders slumped, her entire world reduced to ash. I stood in the center of the office, the silence heavy and thick. Linnea walked up beside me and gently placed a hand on my back. Are you okay? She whispered. I took a deep breath, smoothing the front of my blazer. I looked at the drafting table, at the blueprints, at the intricate structures I spent my life designing. Buildings designed to withstand earthquakes, hurricanes, and the brutal test of time. I'm fine, I said, my voice steady, turning back to the table. Let's get back to work. The final legal proceedings were a formality, a tedious, bureaucratic autopsy of a dead marriage. Vance's lawyer attempted to negotiate a settlement 3 times. The first offer requested I assume the entirety of the marital debt, while allowing Vance to keep the down payment funds currently frozen in escrow. The second offer begged for a structured buyout of his contributions to my architecture firm, claiming his emotional support was integral to my career success. The third offer was just a desperate plea for a lump sum of $20,000 so he could secure a lease on an apartment. Harrington rejected all 3 offers with single-sentence emails. When the final hearing arrived in early March, the air outside was still bitterly cold, the Chicago wind howling off the lake, but inside the courtroom, the temperature was absolute zero. Vance sat at the respondents' table alone. His lawyer hadn't shown up. I learned later that Vance had run out of money to pay his retainer, and the attorney had filed a motion to withdraw from the case the day before. Vance was representing himself, pro se. It is universally considered legal suicide. Judge Carver reviewed the final settlement agreement Harrington had drafted. It was a masterpiece of punitive justice, perfectly legal, perfectly brutal. Because Vance had committed marital fraud and dissipation of assets, the court awarded me 90% of the marital estate. I kept the house. I kept my retirement accounts. I kept my investments. Vance was ordered to repay the money he had stolen to fund the Wicker Park apartment, a debt that would be garnished from any future wages he managed to earn. Furthermore, because of his deceit, lack of housing, and the potential psychological harm to Evander, I was awarded sole legal and physical custody. Vance was granted supervised visitation, 2 weekends a month, at a designated facility. He was also ordered to pay child support, calculated based on the income of the logistics job he had lost due to his own fraudulent actions. Mr. Sterling, Judge Carver said, looking over her glasses at him. Do you understand the terms of this decree? Vance stood up. He looked broken, a shell of the confident, arrogant man who had kissed my forehead before leaving for conferences. He was living in a weekly motel in Skokie. He looked exhausted, defeated, entirely hollowed out. I understand, Your Honor, he mumbled, his voice barely audible. Speak up, sir, the judge commanded. I understand, Vance repeated louder, his voice cracking. He looked over at me. His eyes were red-rimmed, pleading. Elara, please, I'm ruined. I have nothing. I can't even afford to eat. I looked back at him. I remembered the red decline button on my phone. I remembered the sound of my own screams in the delivery room, begging for my husband, while he was holding another woman's hand. I remembered the visceral, suffocating terror of thinking I was entirely alone in the most vulnerable moment of my life. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just looked at him with the cold, absolute finality of a closed door. You should have thought of that before you forged my signature, I said quietly, the words carrying across the silent courtroom. Judge Carver banged her gavel. The divorce is granted. The settlement is finalized as written. We are adjourned. It was over. The marriage was dead. The parasite was excised. I walked out of the courthouse, Harrington beside me. The sky was gray, but the biting wind felt clean against my face. I shook Harrington's hand on the steps of the courthouse. You are a terrifying woman, Alara, Harrington said, a rare, genuine smile touching his lips. It was an honor representing you. Thank you, Mr. Harrington, I replied. For everything. I walked to my car. I didn't cry, I didn't celebrate. I just got in, started the engine, and drove home to my son. 6 months have passed since that day. Evander is thriving. He is crawling, laughing, pulling himself up on the edge of the coffee table. He has my eyes, my quiet disposition, and an infectious, wide, gummy smile that lights up the entire house. He is the best thing that has ever happened to me, a beautiful, perfect creation salvaged from the wreckage of a nightmare. I sold the house in the suburbs. I didn't want the memories. I didn't want the nursery Vance had built while turning off his location app. I bought a sleek, modern loft in the city, closer to the architecture firm. It has massive, floor-to-ceiling windows that flood the rooms with natural light. There are no shadows to hide in. Linnea and I were recently promoted to co-directors of our department. We work seamlessly together, two women who understand that structure is everything, both in buildings and in life. As for Vance and Kylia, the universe has a way of balancing the scales, often with a cruel sense of irony. Russo, who I kept on retainer for an extra 3 months just to ensure Vance wasn't trying to hide assets offshore, gave me the final update in May. Vance never recovered his career. The logistics industry is small, and rumors of his mortgage fraud and subsequent firing spread quickly. He couldn't pass a background check for any management position. The last Russo heard, Vance was working as a shift supervisor at a regional shipping warehouse, living in a studio apartment in a rough neighborhood. A massive chunk of his paycheck immediately garnished for the child support he owed both me and Kylia. Kylia didn't fare much better. After her eviction, she was forced to move back to upstate New York to live with her estranged mother. The tragic romantic narrative she tried to sell the internet fell apart when she realized that being a single mother without a wealthy sponsor is a brutal, exhausting reality. She occasionally posts passive-aggressive quotes on social media about surviving toxic people, but her audience has dwindled. The spectacle is over, and the crowd has moved on. I don't think about them often. They occupy a very small, dark corner of my past, a cautionary tale about the people you allow into your sanctuary. But sometimes, late at night, when the loft is quiet and Evander is sleeping soundly in his crib, I stand by the window and look out over the glittering skyline of Chicago. I think about the girl I was a year ago, the girl who apologized for feeling insecure, the girl who handed over her money and her home to keep the peace, the girl who dialed her husband's number 9 times in agonizing pain, desperate for him to save her. That girl died in room 411 of Memorial Presbyterian. The woman who walked out of that hospital didn't need saving. She needed a wrecking ball. If you are watching this, and you are shrinking yourself to fit into a relationship that feels fundamentally wrong, if you are silencing your own intuition because the truth is too terrifying to face, if you are funding, supporting, and carrying the dead weight of people who only love you for what you provide, stop. Stop apologizing for your boundaries. Stop pretending you don't see the red flags waving violently in your face. Stop being the collateral damage in someone else's selfish narrative. Betrayal is the most agonizing pain you will ever endure. It rips you open. It burns your life to the ground. But the fire doesn't just destroy, it purifies. It burns away the illusions, the lies, the leeches, and the dead wood, leaving only the bedrock of who you truly are. They thought they could break me. They thought they could blindside me, drain me, and leave me in the rubble. They didn't realize they were dealing with an architect. I know how to rebuild. And this time I built a fortress. If my story resonated with you, if you've ever had to burn your own life down just to survive the people in it, leave a comment below. Share your story. You are not alone. Hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a video. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. Stay strong, trust your gut, and never ever let them see you break.